Did you think that all Muslims were paedophiles, were rapists at the time?
Back to back we will stand. We will never fucking give up, because Islam is here. Islam is taking over, and Islam will spread. It's fascism. It will spread. It's 1,400-year-old barbaric medieval fucking culture.
There was a reason I was involved in that. I didn't just wake up one day and think, oh, today I'm going to hate Muslims. It wasn't like that. But there's a process, like in any journey, into anybody's story.
Ivan Humble, thank you so much for joining me on the show today, pal. It's a pleasure to have you on. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Mate, it's my pleasure. I think your story's a hope of redemption, innit? It's sad what happened to you in the past, but it's a story of redemption, hope, reform. As I said, hope's the main thing, because not only does it show that, it's not only is it hopeful that you've got out of the situation, but hopefully you can inspire others to get out of the life that you were living. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself before we go any further, pal?
Yeah, so I was mixed up in a world of hate for 5 years. By that I mean I was a member and Regional Organiser for the English Defence League for East Anglia. There was a reason I was involved in that. I didn't just wake up one day and think, oh, today I'm going to hate Muslims. It wasn't like that. But there's a process, like in any journey, into anybody's story. And I guess that journey begun back in 2009 with a troops homecoming parade, which was when the soldiers come back to the freedom of Luton after serving in Afghanistan, I think. And that was the 2nd Battalion Royal Anglians. And halfway through that protest, they were spat at and abused by a group of radical Muslims, a group called Al-Mujahideen, I think it was back then. They kept getting prescribed and changing their names, so they had quite a few names, but they were abusing our troops, spitting at them and shouting abuse like the baby killer, child rapist, and stuff like that. That angered me, if I'm honest, like it did many other people back then.
Yeah.
And that was the sole purpose that the English Defence League was formed. So in the build-up of that, like I said, I formed an opinion. I started to research the group that did the protest and discovered their main man or head boy was Adam Chaudhry. He is a radical Muslim. I didn't know that back then, really. But since in the last couple of years, he'd been arrested for supporting and recruiting for ISIS. So he's not the best Muslim to have got my...
No, he doesn't. He's not representative of all Muslims, is he?
No, but in my defence back then, our media made him the go-to Muslim. So like what I mean, he was on the news reports, he was on the documentaries, he was in the newspaper. Whenever there was something going on, he seemed to be the man with the opinion.
Is that, to challenge you, is that because when you were looking for Muslim representation, it was an extremist Muslim representation, and therefore you were finding him?
Yeah, more or less. Because he was the man to search for, because he was on all the news channels, and the stuff he was saying on there did spread a lot of fear to a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? So the more I researched him, the more knowledgeable I become on his interpretation of Islam, which back then I thought was Islam, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, isn't it? The fact that one person or one group of people, ultimately it's a minority. The amount of Muslims and people that follow Islam in the world is I think it's the biggest religion, I think, isn't it? It's gargantuan. It's huge, right? And so how many people of those people are terrorists? Very small proportion compared to the amount of people that follow Islam. And I think it's that, isn't it? That's the danger. Sort of tarring everyone with that same brush after seeing someone who is on the extreme side, you know?
Yeah, that's true. But like I said, I made him the go-to Muslim. So the town I lived in is a majority white town, 99.8% white still today. So when we see that Muslim on the TV, we rightfully or wrongly perceived him to be the voice of the Muslim community. We didn't see nobody protesting or saying he didn't represent us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Why do you think that you felt, again, this is not a hit piece. Do you know what I mean? I just got a challenger. You know, you're a nice guy, and I think that the most important caveat to all of this is the fact that you no longer believe this, and actually now you're actually going against those beliefs. You're actually helping people avoid going into that life and countering extremism. Why do you think you and all the other people that were part or are part of the EDL thought that this guy represented Muslims? Because not everyone does that, you know. I might have seen this guy, or loads of other people might have seen this one guy on the news, but still thought, well, he clearly doesn't represent all Muslims. Why do you think you thought that at the time?
Because, like I said, because of that Church Homecoming Parade, that's the only reason that man became on my radar, if you know what I mean. Because at the same time in 2009, I was working for a charity for the Viking Family Support Group, which is a sister battalion to the ones marching that day. I knew soldiers on that parade that day as well who was abused. Through the charity work, I've met young lads, 18, 19, coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan with arms and legs missing. So I kind of got angry on their behalf, I guess. And it provoked something inside me that made me research that guy more, that Adam Chowdhury.
Yeah. Do you know what I do think is interesting? And this isn't necessarily to counter your point, nor is it anything to sort of hemorrhage the credibility of any people that are in the army. We had one on last week, and we had one on right at the beginning, a former US Marine. But what I do think is interesting is that to us, if people go away and for whatever reason, I don't know which particular war this was you're talking about, they go away and they do their thing, and we see that as a good thing. They are our heroes. But at what point, if you flip it and you think you live in that country, at what point is it these people are coming in, taking over? What is going on? Do you know what I mean? At what point is that, in a way, terrorism? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get that point, and I didn't realise that until I kind of left that kind of life behind and become friends with different people, the other person kind of thing. I never once considered that some of the people who are my friends now, that it was their families getting bombed and
exactly.
Not because they were doing anything bad, but they were just civilians in the wrong place at the wrong time. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thought never crossed my mind back then. Because I guess, harshly as it is, it didn't affect me personally, so why should I care, kind of thing, if I'm honest about things.
Do you think you were ignorant at the time?
Not really as such, because everything I was saying, the newspapers were saying, or that Muslim guy was saying, so if he was saying it and the papers were printing it, how could I be wrong? Do you know what I mean? But it was that thing about being in the paper. When it's printed in the paper, that seemed to be all right. But then when maybe the EDL voiced that opinion on the streets back then, we were the ones deemed racists and bigots. But in a way, looking at it, we were only highlighting that headline or that story. Yeah. So who was wrong? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's a number of things, isn't it? I think it's one, the way in which it's the EDL specifically made their point. It's a lot of fuck you this, and to be fair, from the other point as well, you know, when there's protesters protesting the protest, do you know what I mean? Yeah. Protesters protesting the EDL protest, there are you Nazi this, you Nazi that, and I think that's a huge problem in this whole circumstance. To be fair, in modern day society, it's the inability to have a conversation, actually sit down like we are now, like you've done with many other Muslims in the past, and actually think, well, hang on, what do you believe? Why do you believe that? What do I believe? Here's why I believe it. And I think you could probably talk on this a lot more than me, but you'll actually find that there's a lot of common ground, more so than you think there would be.
Yeah, and that's what I discovered. Like I said, I had a chance meeting with a Muslim guy who was a white convert back in 2011. I entered into a dialogue with him for about 6 months. A couple of things I did notice that maybe, I say maybe because back then I wouldn't want to admit it, maybe I had the wrong idea about Islam, but I'd never told him that, do you know what I mean? The other thing he told me about was common ground, because although he agreed with some of the things we were warning about, there's nothing about the religion that we said that he agreed with. So that little bit of common ground, thinking, hang on, I never once considered that maybe you have the same fears. I was too busy attacking our differences, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's, again, a huge thing. The fact that, of course, there are issues within the Quran, like there are issues in the Bible. There are Muslim people who rape English people, if you will. You know, Muslims people can be English people, but you know what I mean, that rape white Christians. The same way that there are Christians and England for so long throughout history have gone over to other places and raped and pillaged all their people, you know? That happens. I think the biggest issue within the EDL specifically is the fact that they seem to tar all Muslims and all of Islam with that brush.
Yeah, and we did back then because, like I said, we were, I guess, cherry picking certain verses of the Quran, and then, like I said, Muslims like Ajahn Chowdhury were saying them verses.
Yeah, you were verified in a way. You were sort of reinforced your idea. Yeah,
it's kind of like when Lee Rigby was murdered. The guys who done that were actually reciting part of the scriptures live on the news streams. Do you know what I mean? So for that denial back then that, oh, he wasn't a Muslim, he didn't do that in the name of Islam, didn't wash with us back then. Do you know what I mean? Because we watched it and we heard it with our own eyes on the news. So how can you deny that?
Yeah, no, I understand, but I just wonder why. What do you think? It's a lack of education? Were you brought up in the environment where it was a little bit xenophobic, it was maybe a little bit racist? What was it different between you and let's say someone else who saw that and went, well, clearly they're just being radicalized? What was the difference there, you know?
No, I come from a good childhood. You know what I mean? I had a good childhood and everything. I guess the one thing I was missing was ever being able to get to know the other person. Growing up in a majority white town, do you know what I mean? But I also had lots of vulnerabilities as well, do you know what I mean? Like in my personal life, I suffered from mental health issues, do you know what I mean? I had that quite a few years before I got into the EDL. I had a mental health breakdown. Had to spend 13 weeks in a mental hospital, so... And that's just to get better, do you know what I mean? So back then I had a diagnosis of borderline schizophrenia. So as you can imagine, the stigma around that kind of thing back in the day wasn't too clever. So a few of my friends sort of didn't have much to do with me anymore. The ones that did was the ones I was getting in trouble with, because if there's a fight, we were there kind of thing, do you know what I mean? So, but then I got into a relationship that turned sour, a victim of domestic abuse, which meant I got custody of 2 of my children. That made me become more of a loner, because the mates I was still having a laugh with, I become boring because I was a single dad. 2 kids at home. One was in school, one wasn't in school. So I spent most of my day watching kids' TV. And then when my boy came home watching his junk, I kind of secluded myself into a bit of a loner's world. My social life was on social media. So I didn't really think nothing of talking to strangers back then.
Yeah. So you were sort of very in your bubble and not really like, you weren't coming across X culture, Y culture, this religion, that religion. It was very, this is what I'm living, and anything that infiltrates that is probably the truth, you know?
Yeah, I suppose living on benefits that could have helped with the struggle as well, because you read stories about when everybody come here, they're getting everything that you haven't got, kind of thing. So I guess, lots of different factors led me to that point, do you know what I mean? It wasn't just clear as hating Muslims one day. There's probably lots more as well, vulnerabilities I had back then, but I never really looked at them.
You said you were a victim of domestic abuse, and I think, first of all, that's really interesting, and it's good that you're open about that. We had a victim of domestic abuse woman, which is probably more typical to see on the show as well. So, we in the audience are to an extent knowledgeable on that, because we've listened to this woman's story. But of course, every story is different, and there's so much more to it than you can fit into sort of half an hour, 45 minutes. But what effect did that have on you? Because I think that's almost quite emasculating in a way, isn't it? Because the idea that you are the victim of domestic violence, that's quite an emasculating thing in a sense. Did you joining the EDL, was that maybe a way of trying to gain that masculinity back, or?
Funny you should say that. I did think that not so long back. I did start talking about that, because the domestic abuse wasn't daily, but it was more or less weekly. Do you know what I mean? And quite bad sometimes. And you're right, it did strip me of my masculinity. I didn't feel like a man no more because being a man, I never spoke about it. I didn't reach out to nobody until it was too late. Do you know what I mean? And then I got custody of my kids. But that did give me that back when I got that sense of belonging, to feel a part of something. And I guess getting rid of all your anger and your pent-up aggression at a demo helped as well. It made me feel like a man again, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know. Is that a common theme that you see throughout people that join the EDL, that they have a sense of they don't have that sense of belonging and they look for that, and then once they get it, they latch on? Is that something you see?
I think you see that in any group, in any group or any walk of life. Really, you always want to be heard and you want to belong to something, and I think that's where the extremists can thrive, because of the vulnerable. If they don't fit nowhere, they'll make a box for them to fit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. If we go back then, EDL. I mean, we've talked 15 minutes and we've not actually fully explained what the EDL is, what they do, what they're trying to achieve. Could you talk to me a little bit about that, how it was formed, and you know, those sorts of things?
Yeah, so it's formed really because of that protest in Luton in 2009. It was purely to stand up against the radical Muslims like Adrian Chowdhury. Back then we were warning about radicalisation in prisons, grooming gang scandals, all things that are pretty freely spoken about today, if you know what I mean. So that kind of, looking back on it, that kind of gives me a little bit of justification sometimes, thinking maybe the things we were saying back then was right, but we'd done it the wrong way maybe, because these conversations are now in the open, which makes it easier makes it harder for the extremists to own them conversations now, because they're out in the public, they're being talked about.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I certainly think there are, you know, it would be completely counterproductive to listen to someone from the EDL and completely discount any of their points, because again, they're saying something for a reason. Why are they saying it? Okay, listen, there might be this, there might be that, they might be right about this, they might be right about that. As I said, there might be things in the Quran, like there is in the Bible, but there are issues with it, and I understand that, and we should listen and go, well, maybe we should interpret that in a different way. I think where my issues come into it is, again, as I've said a couple of times, tarnishing them all with the same brush. I think, you know, Islam is one of the biggest religions in the whole world. There's millions and millions and millions of people that follow it, and I bet a good percentage of them, the vast majority, are good people, and it's only the minority, the loud minority, that are these extreme radicalized people. I think that's my issue with it, and also I think it's my issue. I think it's the issue with the sort of direct link that they have to race. I think even though the people from the EDL seem to disagree with that, they say, no, we're not racist group, we have a fundamental issue with Islam. I think a lot of the time it can be very much linked to race, because I watched a documentary prior to coming on the show and speaking to you, and it was a guy called Jamali Maddox. He went into I don't know if you've seen that.
Was that in Western Supermare?
I'm not sure where it was. I'm not sure where it was.
A guy in a grey tracksuit.
Yes, yeah. He and they were all sort of instantly assuming he's a Muslim, he's this, he's that, and then therefore acting towards him in a certain way, when actually he wasn't an Asian. You know, he was a mixed race black man, but he had a long beard, and so they instantly said, "You're this, you're that." You know what I mean? Yeah,
but not every EDL member was like that as well. Do you know what I mean?
True. Okay, that's true. Yeah.
And a lot of the people in the EDL wasn't really far right either. Like you said, back there's lots of genuine concerns. But when you're not having the public conversation, people on the far right, groups like that, will be having that conversation. And it will lure people in, because they're talking about the issues that they want to talk about that they're not able to talk about anywhere else.
Yeah. And again, there's an irony level, isn't there, that it's all sort of interlinked, because the same way it's the extremists from the Islam that are being heard and that are being listened to, and that are therefore wrongly being tarred with, all of Islam's being tarred with their brush. It can be argued that that's the same with the EDL as well, to an extent, isn't it? Where it's the loud majority that are saying racial slurs, that are being aggressive, that are being violent, that are then being represented as the whole EDL, when actually that's not necessarily the truth, is it?
No, you can say that for any group. Not just
Again, true.
Not just the extreme far right, even Islamist group. Every group starts with a genuine concern. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Maybe on the Islamist side, it could be foreign policy, or, like you said, families getting killed over there. Everyone starts with a genuine concern that's not talked about. And then extremists can use that and cover it in their agendas and use that as to recruit people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Would you have considered yourself a racist at the time?
No, right? I did get asked this quite a bit, and if I'm honest, I didn't see myself as racist because, if I'm honest, Muslims come in a range of colours kind of thing. I hated them if they were Muslim. Not because they're black, brown or white. It was because they were Muslim, what they represented, Islam, do you know what I mean? So for me, it wasn't really about colour of skin. It was purely Muslim, or they were representatives of Islam, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And did you think that all Muslims were paedophiles, were rapists at the time?
No, but what made me get into that was kind of the cover-ups, if you know what I mean. We only hear about 1,400 white girls. You're telling me there weren't no Sikh or Muslim girls involved in that as well. But you don't hear about that sort of things because of that kind of community honour they have, do you know what I mean? So you don't hear it. So, and the way the press and the media make it sound, do you know what I mean? It just adds to that anger as well. I didn't think everybody was, but I thought a lot of people were covering up, do you know what I mean?
What do you mean? Wait, explain that. I don't really understand that. They were covering up.
Because a lot of these were historic, so somebody must have known in their family or something, do you know what I mean? Because a lot of the grievance scandals is like historic, innit? Do you know what I mean? So I think somebody must have known what they were up to at that time, maybe, do you know what I mean?
So what you're saying is that even the people that weren't Muslims, this is you again in past tense, you believe that even the people that weren't paedophiles and rapists and these murdering people that were Muslim, they probably knew about things that were going on, and therefore you hated them as well.
Yeah, because they're kind of, I've maybe felt denial covering up, because again, whenever anything like that happens, they're not Muslim, they're this, they're not this. It's that denial, do you know what I mean? Not that, it's because that grooming gang label, again, labels causing trouble. The grooming gang label is easy to stick to a community or whatever, or a group, but it takes away the severity of the offence, which is paedophilia. It should be a paedophilia gang, do you know what I mean? Then that's more of a balanced description, which is the true description of what the crimes they're actually up to, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. Would you, like, you've got kids, for example, if like, how is that your beliefs back then? Again, where do you stand now, by the way, before we get into it? Where do you stand now with it? What are your beliefs now?
A lot different to what they back then, totally different to what they were back then, do you know what I mean? But there is still issues, do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that it's all rosy and all perky clean, but it's not just the denial, it's like the police as well, the way they let people down as well, do you know what I mean? There's a lot more to it than the one-sided picture that I saw before.
Explain to me, how much more, explain.
Well, do you know what I mean? What we were seeing in our echo chambers that we were in, the secret groups and that, was we were only just seeing stories about the Pakistani men. We didn't realise that it was the politicians maybe and social services that let the girls down as well, because they don't really report on that bit as much as they did the people who did it. Do you know what I mean? And then all the people running around the courts taking pictures and videos outside just fueled it more. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There were when watching some of these EDL demonstrations, there's a lot of P words being used, N words being used, or at least that might be the minority, but that's what I've seen. That is inherently linked to race, and also why, if the one thing that they're hating the most is extremism, why are they representing extremism in their own actions?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is, I think back then we didn't think it was extremism. Do you know what I mean? Which is bizarre, I think. And a lot of different people within EDL had different stories. Do you know what I mean? Different experience of say Pakistani lads or Bangladeshi boys in their town. They may have had a fight, got beaten up by some, so their hatred was maybe a bit more vocal, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. What did you think of people that, like myself, maybe that disagreed with the EDL and what you guys believe. What did you think of those other people that weren't Muslims, that were just English people, that well, again, Muslims can be English people, do you know what I mean? And a lot of them are. But you get what I'm trying to say. What did you think of that side of things?
Probably the same as they thought of us, do you know what I mean? It was that, to be fair, the left and the right feel each other, but the left never recognises that. They'll always deny it. But that's what it was for us at the demonstrations. It was the counter-protesters that provoked some of us, do you know what I mean? That got our anger up, that made it turn out the way it did, do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because you always felt as if you had to be on your defence in case you got attacked or something, do you know what I mean? So naturally you're on edge. So when somebody provokes you, the natural reaction is to retaliate or to say something back.
Yeah, that's such a huge thing, isn't it? Again, that comes back to the point that we said at the beginning of the inability to have a conversation drives this hatred, drives this extremism, because, as we said, if you sit down and have a conversation, you'll be able to debate in a calm manner and actually find a middle ground. But when you are saying that I am this and that, a P word, an N word or whatever, I'm then going to say, well, you're then a Nazi scum and everything you're saying is wrong. When actually, none of those things are true. Not everything you're saying is wrong. I'm sure in that sort of big fusion of hatred, there are some points that are true, and likewise as well. Do you know what I mean? It's that divisiveness that is so dangerous and toxic.
So I suppose another thing, this isn't sticking up for nobody, this is just something that I've noticed on my journey, that even back in my time when somebody's calling you a Nazi to your face for 4 or 5 hours, you're going to respond. And some of the boys back then did respond with a Nazi salute. Now, this wasn't because they were Nazi.
I see what you mean.
This was because that person was calling them a Nazi for 5 or 6 hours. So if you're going to call me that, I might as well be it, because me doing that is going to provoke you just as much as you're provoking me. I'm not saying that there wasn't people doing it, because there was. But also camera angles is another thing that depends where your hands are up, if you're shouting or clapping or something. Camera angles is an important thing as well. I'm not sticking up for nobody, but I think that if you're going to tell a story, let's tell it what it was from both sides. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, let's be honest and let's be true. That's why I'm getting you on, because you know, that's such a huge thing. I don't want to repeat myself, but that's such a huge thing with, you see it in politics all the time. Like, I live in Manchester, and it's predominantly left-wing up in Manchester, you know, predominantly Labour supporter. And now my mum and her partner live where I'm originally from. It's from down south, where it could be, you know, typified as more right-wing to an extent. But up north, you hear, Tory knobs or something like this, and it's like, you're all Tory knobs, and then down here you hear, just leftist dicks up there, leftist monkeys or whatever, just being mental and thinking that everyone, and it's that time with the same brush that is so dangerous, isn't it? Yeah,
it's just everything nowadays just seems to be divisional.
Yeah,
there's always somebody looking for that us and them narrative, and even COVID brought us that, sadly. Do you know what I mean? Look at the start of COVID. Look at last year when COVID hit us first. It was great to see Facebook quite positive, with all this positivity and people helping each other, neighbours getting to know each other. It was great. A few months on, or 12 months on, look at us now, how divided we are over it now.
So true. How do you think we can combat that? How do you think we can try and eradicate that, or is it impossible to eradicate?
Just keep chipping away. I don't think you'll ever defeat hate or defeat extremism, but what you can do is chip away at it. But the only way to do that is by talking to people. You're not going to get it by trying to keep looking for a boogeyman to blame, or you're just wasting your money looking for a boogeyman. Let's tackle the real issues. If you want to tackle hate and extremism, understand the underlying issues of different people's experiences.
Yeah. You mentioned the fact that you had kids, and that you're sort of, when you entered the EDL, your kids, how old were the kids at the time?
The kids at home were, let me think, about 3 and 6, I think.
Right, okay, 3 and 6. So were you projecting these views onto them? Were they aware of what you were doing as they were growing up?
No, not intentionally. I never used to sit down and say, but probably if I look back and be honest, maybe they overheard a YouTube video I was watching, or heard me on the phone, or if I had a mate round I was talking, so maybe like that, but they've never turned to that way of thinking. Or
well, that was my question, because when they're that age, just even if you weren't saying to them, all Muslims are this, you're a sponge when you're a kid. Do you know what I mean? You're an absolute sponge, and you pick up everything in your surroundings. Even the way I speak, the way I laugh is like my dad's. Not because I thought, oh, my dad's laughing like that, I'll laugh that way, but because I'm just a sponge, and you just pick up little things. Do you know what I mean? How much do you think they picked up of that at the time? And then obviously now you've gone a full 180, or maybe not a full 180, but you've changed your views a lot. How have they adjusted to going, oh, wow, well, we used to think that, Dad, but now we don't think that? Have they struggled with that at all?
No, my kids have been lucky they've been able to mix with the other at school, do you know what I mean? So
Got ya.
they've got friends who are Muslims, they've got friends who are different, so it was easier for them not to get involved. And because they're young, it's quite easy, so if I'm guilty of one thing back then, it was neglecting them with my time. Feeding them and that was no problem, but my time was... The EDL kind of took over my life too. When I used to go away weekends sometimes, I'd dump my kids on my mum and dad on a Friday, pick them up Saturday night, Sunday night, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I wasn't there when they probably needed me. But my kids have turned out all right. I suppose the saddest thing is how I treated my oldest daughter. I think, while I'm being brutally honest, I think it's worth getting out there that I wasn't a good dad back then, do you know what I mean? Because of some issues. And I had an older daughter back then who was 15. I was a weekend dad, so seeing her on a Saturday clashed with my demos, do you know what I mean? So we had a big fallout because I used to lie to her, deceive her, saying, I'll meet you in town, but I'll be 200 miles away in another town, do you know what I mean?
Really?
So as you can imagine, we didn't speak for a good couple of years, but we're back on track now, but that's only because I had to prove myself, do you know what I mean? And it took a lot of work, but I'm there now, do you know what I mean? So we've got a good relationship again now. So, and the reason I mention that is because I read an article from Mumsnet about 3 years ago, and I briefly touched on that. And in the comments section, there's another young girl who wrote in the comments, this story feels so much like mine. My dad does the same to me. Yeah. So that's why I talk about that, because it wasn't just my daughter going through that. Other people's kids were going through that as well.
What was the peak of your time in the EDL? Can you tell me a little bit about your peak in the EDL? What things were you doing? What were your beliefs? And then from there, what are some of the most shocking and potentially violent, or just some of the most shocking things that you've seen in EDL protests?
Oh, blimey, where do I start? I suppose back then I believed that Islam was going to take over. The Muslims wanted to rule the country. Sharia courts were going up left, right, and centre.
Yeah, I've heard this word, Sharia law, Sharia courts. So, what does that mean?
Well, back then I thought it meant cutting hands and legs off. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what we were seeing in Iraq and places like that under their Sharia law. But I've since learned that Sharia law is a way of life. It tells a Muslim how to lead their life from even cutting their fingernails to everything. But of course, back then we were only seeing the horrific parts of it.
Yeah, you were blinkered. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Since then, different, but that's the kind of thing I believed in back then, do you know what I mean? And it was just arranging demonstrations, forming divisions, anything that needed doing, we done sort of thing, do you know what I mean? It was
like what? What does that mean?
Like anything, recruiting was a big part, arranging meet and greets, travel to demonstrations. It was quite a busy life, really, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just didn't have time, because then you had to answer messages from the various groups and divisions you're in. It was just non-stop. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, what are some of the most horrific things that you have seen? Because is there a lot of violence involved in these protests?
Yeah, but it's not. I don't want to stick up for it. The violence is bad without a doubt. Do you know what I mean? Violence never solved anything, but the violence was from both sides, really. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the EDL pictures made the papers, the rest didn't, kind of thing. Some of the worst things I've seen, I guess, was the Birmingham demo in 2013, where it just went tits up, kind of thing, where something provoked the crowd and it just went bedlam. They were running around smashing windows. It just got out of control, do you know what I mean? And sometimes that's an element of that, but then in that pack mentality thinking, you go with a pack. So a lot of people would, as soon as that happened, you'd go down there to protect whoever it is, but then you'd get dragged into it. So Birmingham was quite bad. Leicester as well was the same kind of thing, where people broke through the police lines and there's fighting in the streets with the opponents. I've seen lots of injuries as well from not just bottles being thrown from the EDL, but bottles being thrown at us, police truncheons hitting people on the head. It's not a nice life, really, when you think about it. Do you know what I mean?
No. Could you tell us a little bit about how then you did begin to make that process of leaving the EDL and what that process was like and how you came to that point?
As I said, I met the two Muslim guys and I got into a conversation.
How did you meet them?
Well, the first one was by chance. I was shopping in Norwich with my kids at Christmas and my daughter wanted the toilet. And the only place I could find was this big library called the Forum. So I went in there and that's when the chance meeting happened. Do you know what I mean? We got talking, and then, like I said, when I met the second Muslim guy, being from the former jihadist background, and he'd turned his life around, and it was him, because after we had that first conversation and we sort of broke that barrier, I remember him saying, look, you've got lots of genuine concerns there that I share, just like what the other Muslim guy said, but then he said, you've got misconceptions as well. And back then, I think I was quite open-minded back then still. So I said to him, well, if you're prepared, I'm prepared to hear about my misconceptions and learn about them. So that was a period of 2 years, but in that 2 years, a lot of things happened. So the death of Lee Rigby was one big part of it, because it tested our friendships because of that, do you know what I mean? So, but both of the Muslim guys I've met rang me up the next day to apologise and explain things to me, which I thought was quite good. And then about a month later, I think, the EDL had planned to do loads of silent walks in memory of Lee Rigby. And we did one in Ipswich. That's probably the only time it's been done, that I asked the Muslim guy in Ipswich who I was speaking to, would he be prepared to walk with us, which he did. So back in 2013, I think that was, we did a march, EDL and the Muslim community, or some of the Muslim community there, which had never been done before. I made lots of national newspapers the next day. Lots of positives for me, a lot of negatives towards my Muslim friend who done it, though. Do you know what I mean? So that's a downside to that. But it was after that march when I really realised that he was serious about sharing things in common with us, because he thought the death of Lee Rigby was horrific and wrong as well. And I think that's what sort of done it. Then I think from when we started having conversations with men, from then on, I started believing more in him. And then after a few weeks, about 10 weeks after that march we done, I did a demonstration. And some of the things that were being said, and somebody threw a bottle, I just thought to myself, this ain't me no more. I guess, if I'm honest, back then, when I didn't have Muslim friends, it was easy to do and say things. But now I had friends that were Muslim, it was that much harder. Because I'd think as if I was offending them, if you know what I mean. So I decided to walk away then. But then walking away was quite an adventure as well, because
I was going to say, yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, I went from the hater to the hated overnight. Literally,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I left one day and the next day I was getting hate mail.
I was going to say, did you have any kickback from the EDL?
Yeah, quite a bit. From members, really, more than anything, do you know what I mean? 6 years on, I still get the odd bit now and then. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I don't know. But if you want change, you have to be the change, and you have to take the rough with the smooth. And I guess I'm prepared for that. I guess not everybody's going to like me, but I'm trying to do my best to bring change. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, 100%. So how are you trying to do that? And going into schools, I know you do a lot of that now. How are you intending to work against extremism on the side of the EDL and things like that?
Yeah, so I was lucky 3.5 years ago to be filming a documentary where I took a member, the ex-EDL member, up to a mosque in Manchester. That documentary was cut because they were also filming in America back then, but it kicked off in Charlottesville, so they filmed with America. But while we were up in Manchester, the mosque we went to was a Manchester Central Mosque. And I went up there, took an ex-member, like I said, to have a look around at every cupboard, every door open, do you know what I mean? A chance to meet Muslims. It was Ramadan, we had a bit of food. And it's just that chance to hear him have the same experience I did by sitting down with some Muslims and being able to have his voice heard without judgment. Not did I know that then that the Imam who was there, Irfan, had a counter-extremism program called the Mean Your Education. So that's kind of how I got my job with him. He liked what I'd done about, because the Me and You education is all about creating that conversation, which was what I'd done that day off my own back kind of thing. So we've been linked up for the last 3.5 years, and that's what we do. We go to schools and give them counter narratives to some of the arguments. And I think the most important thing is it shows that unity can work, because I hate Muslims. Now I'm working with a Muslim guy, which is quite, as you can imagine, it's quite a shock at schools when Irfan asked me at the start, what did you think of Muslims? And I say, I hated you and your religion.
Yeah.
Everyone looks at you as if you're the bad guy, do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
quite awkward. But then when he runs up and gives you a hug, and then we tell my story later on, it gets people engaged, do you know what I mean?
What do you think of that person then that you were? Was it a bad person?
No, I just think I wanted answers like most people.
Okay.
I don't think I was a bad person. I probably did turn a bit bad because of the labelling. Because when you're labelled something, you live to that label for some reason. It's like when you're at school. If you get told you're a naughty boy, you're going to be the naughty boy just because you're getting told that. It's the same kind of thing throughout your life. If you get labelled something, you sort of start to live to it because you've got no options.
Yeah. Got ya. Well, Ivan, thank you so much for coming on the show today, pal.
Thank you.
We'll whack all your stuff in the description, in below the video. Make sure to check all of Ivan's stuff out, because what you're doing now, going to schools, trying to help people understand that, things aren't the way that necessarily they see them all the time in the EDL, and because you're not just going everything the EDL are saying is wrong, are you?
No.
You're going, well, there are these things that are wrong about the EDL, but actually you should listen to these things as well. And I think
I think what I'm doing is giving that balanced outlook that's been missing all these years.
Yeah.
On any group, whatever extremist group, I try and look at the balanced picture, because when you talk about one side worse than the other is where you get problems. If you can talk about a subject equally and give like the pros and cons, that's surely a better conversation than just saying they're bad, because that's scaremongering.
And that's also wrong. Rarely can people be complete. One opinion can be wrong, but when there's a group of people that hold a variety of opinions, surely in there somewhere there's something going to be a middle ground. And if there isn't, rather than go, they're bad, we hate them, we're not going to listen to them, go, well, we'll listen to them and find out why. Because that's how we start, and I think that's the most important thing to finish on, isn't it? Find out why. Because if you can find out why they think that, you can maybe try and change that, and try and relate to them to an certain extent. Because
it's not really about changing them. It's just about giving them a bigger picture to think about.
Yeah.
It's just giving them maybe they're getting only a part of their viewpoint. If you open that picture up a little bit and giving them something else to question, then that plants a seed in the head, and then hopefully that seed grows to make them a bit more inquisitive and not to take the first thing you hear or read on social media as the truth. Do you know what I mean?
Again, you've educated me there as well, because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Do you know what I mean? And it's that same thing. It's you can hopefully try and plant that seed, but ultimately it's the same with anything. You can't make an alcoholic a not alcoholic. You can give them the tools that they need in order to stay away from that addiction and hopefully plant that seed, and then it will grow, but you can't make them not drink water without essentially restraining them. Do you know what I mean? And it goes the same here.
And that's why I do what I do, why I talk the way I do about people, because it's the only way to break down the barriers is to speak to people. If you keep labelling people, you're not going to solve the problem. You're just blaming people. There's enough blame going on in the world now. Let's talk to people. Let's share the blame with each other. We've each got a responsibility to safeguard each other. And that's the thing that people forget, that and respect. Do you know what I mean?
Listen, people are going to disagree. People are going to disagree with maybe some of the things that your opinions, and that's fine. But what I don't think they can disagree with is the argument that it's balance that we need, and it's understanding and it's respect that we need. And ultimately, that's the undercurrent of your point, isn't it? It's balance, respect, dialogue, and conversation. And within that, you've got your own opinions. you know, you might think that, I don't know, university should cost £2,000, not 9. Do you know what I mean? Or whatever political opinion. And people are always going to have different political opinions, but it's the ability to converse, to have to respect each other and find a middle ground and hopefully progress from there that I think is the most important undercurrent of your life and your movement at the moment. So Ivan, thank you so much for coming on the show once again, pal. We'll whack all of Ivan's stuff in the description. Make sure to check it out. And it's just an open dialogue that we want. You know, there's no need for any hate anywhere. So, yeah. Guys, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Ta-da.